My name is Gale Johnson, and I came from Iowa, a small town in Iowa, and I was 24 years of age when I went into the service. I had been an athletic coach and a teacher for a period of 1 year and then went into the service.
Tell me, what did you do in the service, where you were based, and what group you were based with?
After going through a very small portion of basic training, I was sent to Flint, Michigan, where I attended an engine school for a while and then never used it again, and was sent to Kelly Field in Texas, where I worked with, as an enlisted man, with plans and training. And from there I was sent to Miami Beach as an officer training school, an officer training school. I was accepted for flight training, but I had to either drop out of officer training school or go to flight training, and I chose to complete my officer's training. I applied for flight training again, but in the meantime was sent to Europe, and when this time they would not allow me to leave the 8th Air Force area. And I then went into flying control, which was a school that was conducted by the British. We flew with English pilots and instructors with old English Anson airplanes. The English flying controllers were given navigational wings. We were not. And we were sent back to American bases. They were trying to standardize what we would call CAA regulations of flying, not only for Europe, or for England, but for Europe as well following the war. But we all had to have one type of flight regulation to keep something out of chaos, because there's so very, very many planes flying in the area at one time over there. We had something like, pardon me, 60 bomber bases, 25 fighter bases, and 15 medium bomber bases. And these bases were in many instances only 5 miles apart. They did not come back and take off one at a time. They took off in groups, and we had almost chaos on every takeoff and every return with planes trying to climb, and it was never clear weather. We only had about 2 weeks of sunshine a year. And they would have to take off and climb this altitude. And these fellows were in danger from the moment they took off until they returned. It was our duty to take them off and to land them. And we landed them under conditions that would not even be allowed. Well, they would be allowed with the more sophisticated equipment that they have today, but we didn't have sophisticated equipment. We took them off and we could not even see them. And we landed them when our only means of assistance were flares fired at the end of the runway, one on the runway and one out 200 or 300 yards. And they would come over the first and land at the second. Lots of times right at you where you were firing the flare. So it was a nerve-wracking job. You were on it day after day after day after day, because we flew every day that we possibly could fly. Sometimes in the summertime, 2 missions a day. Not only was that nerve-wracking, but of course then to compound the problem, you had 40 planes, 30 planes, whatever the mission was. You had perhaps 5 planes, 1 plane, 8 planes that was shot up. They were not capable of flying very well with 2 engines, not at all with 1 engine. They had to land with on tires that they had no knowledge that perhaps was flat when they approached, and we never knew which way they were going off the runway. With wounded aboard, there was always a certain amount of panic on each plane trying to get preference to land over the other. It was very nerve-wracking. We sent 1 man home with a great case of ulcers. We put another man home with a nervous breakdown. And I think that was, if the flying controllers today feel they have a problem with planes coming in on a crowded situation with all the computers, the technical equipment, radar that they have, we didn't have, they would have gotten a kick out of watching what we went through. So it was, I'm not making a hero out of myself, but it was a very nerve-wracking business.
How did you decide when there were planes coming in all shot up and they're all coming in at once?
The only way we knew that we would not know which plane was coming in. They would come in and firing red flares, and we would ask the other planes to clear the perimeter of the airfield and give them preference to landing. But if there was no injured aboard and we could keep the plane in the air, we would try to keep them off of the airfield, because we didn't want them crashing up on the runway and keeping the other planes from landing. So if it was just a matter of one engine being out or a flat tire or something like that, we would ask them to stay out of the flight pattern until we got the other planes in. But as for the other, if we had more than one plane coming in injured, it was just a matter of whichever one got there first.
Tell us what it was like before, during, and after missions. For example, from the time the planes got ready to take off and then assemble and then go and then come back.
Well, our job was we were given time at the briefing. We would give the taxi order, because it was very important that the planes take off in an order so that they would be able to get into their flights easier. To form, of course, they would climb to break out of the clouds and then fly a racetrack course where the last plane would cut across the end of the racetrack and try to get into position. This we had nothing to do with. The only thing we had to do was to take them off and to give them taxiing order on the takeoff. We would also, at the briefings, give them any information that we would have that would come from the British or the 8th Air Force as to localities that they should, on a return, where they should try to cross the channel if there was problems, as there frequently were, where the Germans would occupy a town after we had made our invasion. The Germans would occupy these little different towns and would not retreat. They didn't want us to use them as ports, Americans to use them as ports. So they would sit in there with guns, and if our plane came back, a crippled plane or a plane out of formation or any planes, it was very likely to get blasted, and we would tell them what cities to avoid. There was an order that they didn't obey too frequently, that as they approached the English coast to fly in a northwesterly direction, so that the English gunners would identify them as being friendly. And quite frequently we would tell them this and they'd forget it, and they'd come across the coast, get blasted, and then they'd come rushing into us and say, hey, the British are shooting at us. But this was part of our job at the briefing.
On the takeoffs, what was the timing involved as the planes were getting
A prop wash was always a problem, and we would try to get these takeoffs at approximately from a 20 to a 30-second interval. But that would vary. They would take off under weather conditions where we could not see the runway. So we would put what we called a caravan. It was a Jeep with a radio and a telephone connection to the tower on each end of the runway. And we would tell them, give the plane in the position. As soon as the plane would start down the runway, the other would pull on the runway, and we would say, give the plane the green light. Then the next plane would pull on the runway. We would wait until the plane, this was under very severe conditions, when the plane had cleared the upwind end of the runway, the fellow up there would call us and say, he's passed, you can give another one the light. Well, this would take probably a minute or two. This was under very severe conditions. Normally, we would just watch, and when a plane was half or two-thirds of the way down the runway, we would tell the fellow so we were maintaining radio silence, as you know, we would tell the fellow in the little caravan, give him the green light, until we had fired all these planes off.
How long would it take to get the group off?
Well, that would depend. The normal effort was 3 squadrons flying and 1 squadron stood down. But on maximum effort, we would fly 4 planes. And as for the number of the planes, it could vary for in the upper 20s to in the 40s. So it might take 25, 30 minutes. It might take longer.
How long did it take to land a group?
The landing times would vary too. If we were under these adverse conditions, we would be lucky if we got a plane in every 2 or 3 minutes. If it was a good landing condition, the planes would come in, peel off in a certain flying, a flight per flight, which might mean 5, 6, 8 planes, fly, make the turn, go the downwind leg, and we always hoped that they would keep it in tight, as we called it, and then they would land at perhaps every 30-second interval, 20 or 30-second interval. there again they had to watch the prop ways. Quite frequently they would come in too close together and would stretch out until these bases were so close together at 5 miles apart. Our downwind leg would be flying over the approach and the landing leg of our neighbor airport. Then we would get into a real hassle with flying control from Shipton or Wendling about get your planes out of our flight pattern. We're running right at one another here.
What were the major problems the air controllers had? You mentioned a few of them. In your estimation, what were the key problems?
Well, the key problems, were the main problems, of course, were the landings and the takeoffs, particularly the landings. Weather was a very, very bad thing in England, 2 weeks of sunshine on average a year. The prevailing winds, of course, was out of the southwest. And they were landing, if we did get sunshine, we had a lot of what we would call industrial haze. It was a salt haze from that little island. And they couldn't see. They could see, if they had the industrial haze, they could see after they got by the runway, but they couldn't look into the west, the sunshine, if there was such. And that was our main problem, plus the injuries, plus the planes that were shot up and so on. It was a return that was always our big problem. We always, if we had a problem, it seemed like they came in groups, and we would have to make one decision after another in just a little while.
What was your most difficult time during all this activity that you can recall?
Well, I think one of the most stressful was winters were always bad. And one winter we had a series of snowstorms, and this was not common for England. And we would go out, we would have the transportation department go out with trucks with plows. Our runways were 50 yards wide. And they would go out and plow this snow off, which would leave a little bank on each side of the runway. Then if it warmed up during the day, this would melt, and we would have an icy glare from one end of the runway to the other. We would then try to get transportation to sprinkle salt on those runways just maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes before takeoff to make it possible for them to use it. Now, it was not a problem on the actual takeoff. You can take off on ice as well as you can, but it was a return. And if we had a plane come back in, as I can recall, one, I think I have a picture of it smashed up. It came in with a full bomb load, a full gas load. He had just gotten airborne, and he discovered a very bad leak in these bomb bay, spraying gas on the bombs. He asked to come right back in. The ice had not been sprayed that day yet with salt or sand, and he landed at around, with a full load. He had to come in fairly hot, and slid the full length of the runway. At the end of the runway, we had a fence, wire fence, gas spraying out through the bomb bays. He went through the fence out into a plowed field. It pretty well finished off the plane, but we had that type of a condition. That winter with that snow was a very, very stressful winter for us. It was our job to get the field in shape. And I know it was, all of this that I'm speaking of was stressful for us, but you know it had to be stressful for the crews more than us. It was their lives on the line.
Did you get to know any of the air crews? Very,
very well. These crews would come up frequently for advice on mentioning the clearance along the coast. They would come up they had to come up and get clearance to test flight their planes when they'd change engines or if there was an improvement made on them or something. And we would get acquainted, and of course we would eat together and drink together at the bar at the Officers Club. And we knew all of them, most all of them, probably better, as Mr. Perry was speaking, we probably knew them better than anyone else because we mixed with all 4 squadrons. Pat said, I didn't know anybody in the other 3 squadrons. And we knew, not intimately, but we met them, we knew them by name, many, and that was one of the tougher things. You lost a lot of friends. This picture was taken at the time of our bomb dump explosion. General Doolittle flew up to inspect and to find out what was the reason. The man on the left is our base CO, Fred Miller. It's General Doolittle signing the clearance, and myself, and the man on the right was General Doolittle's son. They flew up in a B-26. These pictures show me standing in a crater of a bomb dump that was caused by a bomb explosion at a bomb dump. Generally, a bomb explosion will with a bomb laying flat on the ground will not create a great crater, but this one was so large, is estimated somewhere between 15 and 2,000 ton of bombs, and that crater is approximately somewhere between 30 and 50 feet deep and perhaps 150 to 200 feet across. It did a tremendous amount of damage to our base. It was caused by careless handling of bombs of 12 individuals, 12 truckloads of bombs being unloaded in the bomb dump, and they feel that they were kicking the bombs out and letting them fall on the concrete. The bottom picture shows the side of a hangar, a sheet metal hangar. We had 2 of these on the base, and this one happened to be somewhere between a half mile and a mile away from the bomb dump. It is taken to show the force of the concussion which ripped those large panels of steel right off the side of the hangar, did a great deal of damage to the front of the hangar, but from that distance it gives you an idea then of the tremendous force of the bomb explosion. This is a picture of the plane that landed on our runway when we had an icy condition, not been able to take care of, slid the end of the runway, went through the wire fence, and ended up in the plowed field on the far end, and fortunately all the members walked away from that one. Well, this is the control tower of our base, which was more or less a standard type of construction. It consisted of the weather department at the bottom, a pilot's room, also on the bottom floor, and the top floor was the operational room for flying control and 2 little living quarters. It was a fairly normal tour. We spent 24 hours a day for the total time that we were there. Well, it wasn't all work, as you can imagine. We did have a basketball team for the base. We would play the other teams in the 2nd Air Division, and the common meeting place was a wing of a nearly destroyed cathedral in Norwich. One wing of the cathedral had not been damaged, so they closed it off, the damaged area, and put basketball hoops in there, and that is our common gymnasium. And the interesting thing is this church had been started and built before America was discovered. Norwich surrounds an old castle that has a great history. I took this picture from right in the main part of the town of Norwich, showing this beautiful old castle. This is the main cathedral in Norwich, although it's a city of cathedrals. It's the main cathedral in Norwich. It's a beautiful building. You can barely see the man standing in the main door, and that door is perhaps 20 feet tall. This is a picture that was taken when I took a short leave to see a friend in Manchester, England. And Lady Leash, General Leash's wife, had opened an officers' club, and I happened to stumble in as one of the first 2 officers into it. And this was taken a picture for the Manchester Guardian.
Tell us about the Christmas story.
I think I've already mentioned the fact that we never had enough runway for these heavy laden planes. At the end of our runway, which was 1,900 yards, and not 2,000, 1,900 yards long, was a woods. And it was very common early in the war, early in the occupation of this air base, for our bombers to drag their landing gear up through the tops of these trees on takeoff. They'd come back with pieces of the limbs in the trees. So we prevailed upon the British to cut a tunnel back in the woods about 200 yards to give us a little more room, which they did, and it did help. But on landings, we would have to go out among those trees to shoot flares to help the pilots line up on the runway, come in over the first, land of the second. And one Christmas Eve, I was out there helping direct shooting these flares when one of the enlisted men said, "Can't I go in and pick out a Christmas tree?" Well, knew that the English would not particularly appreciate this venture, but I told him to get back in there far enough, maybe they'd never find it. So he went quite a ways back in the woods and cut the top out of a tree and brought it back and put it in the truck, and we covered it with a canvas and took it up to the control tower. Well, we didn't really know where to put the thing up because we thought we might be in a little trouble. When we finally put it up in my room, which was a little larger than Captain or Major Flaming's, and then we decided it had to be decorated. And this was probably a show of American ingenuity. One fellow said, "We've got to have snow." The ambulance driver said, "I got a lot of snow on the ambulance, I'll go down and get cotton." So he brought up the cotton and spread all around the tree. And then somebody said, "Well, how are we going to stand it up?" The ordnance man, these were people who did duty at the tower, said, "I'll go get a bottom of a bomb." We wondered how we could make the tree stand, and one of the ordnance sergeants said, "I can handle that." Went out the bomb dump and screwed off the fins off at the end of a bomb and brought it in, and with a little packing we had a perfect stand for the tree. Now we had the packing in the snow, but what about the tinsel? Well, we dropped tinsel during the war to deflect the radar of the German guns, and we had lots of packs in the Ordnance Department, little fine sheets of tinsel, so we brought that in and we got our snow decoration, our tinsel decoration for the tree. And then for lights, we thought we'd ought to have electric lights. And these fellows, we had a type of a lighting system that was to be used in emergency, which was battery operated, a battery in each light. We had red, green, and yellow lights. And they unscrewed those sockets and wired them, got an airplane battery, so we had a battery light. We had our Christmas tree lights on the tree. Well, Christmas morning, we fellows in the tower decided we'd exchange gifts. But as the pilots would come up to do their practice flights or come up to do their running in their engines, they would see this tree if the door was open into my room. And invariably, it was amusing because the story was nearly always the same. They would come in and say, we fellows in my crew want to have a little get together. Of course, it isn't for me, it's for the kids, these younger guys in the crew. And we would like to, would it be all right if we'd come in and use your tree? And I would give them permission, but it got to the point where I had to allocate time because I had quite a few of them came in and wanted to exchange. And you think that Christmas is for the kids, but how old is a kid? You know, they all wanted to use our Christmas tree.
Tell me what you want the world or history to remember about your contribution to the war effort.
Well, I guess I wasn't a hero. All I did was what the country asked me to do, and I did it willingly and completed my duty willingly and with a minimum of grousing, I think, and got the job done.